The Wyoming sky stretched, wide and bruised with charcoal clouds. The afternoon, the bride he never ordered, showed up on his porch, and Colt Maddox, a rancher with a past heavy enough to bend steel, stood frozen with his hand still on the barn door, wondering if the storm rolling over the high plains had finally knocked something loose in his senses, because there was no way in God's rugged creation that a woman in a torn wedding dress should be standing on the edge of his porch with her veil fluttering like ghost silk in the wind, clutching a suitcase that looked older than sin and staring at him, as if fate had carved his name into her bones. Colt wasn't the kind of man who believed in destiny. He believed in cattle, in fence posts, in the steady rhythm of a long day's work. But the woman at his door had an air about her that made something inside him sit up straight. She said her name was Evelyn Hart, though her trembling voice made it sound like she was afraid of being heard by someone she'd left behind. She explained, or tried to, that she'd been sent here, that a letter had been delivered to her days ago, promising a safe marriage to a quiet rancher in Wyoming who needed a wife to help manage his home and land. The only problem was that Colt had sent no such letter. Colt had sworn off anything resembling love or partnership ever since the war took his brother, and guilt took everything else. But when Evelyn's knees buckled from exhaustion, when her fingers whitened around the handle of her weather-beaten suitcase, when her eyes, wide, desperate, bleeding, searched his face for safety, something inside him shifted like an old wagon, finally rolling free of the mud. He carried her inside, careful as if she were made of porcelain, and as he set her on his couch, the storm outside cracked the sky wide open, thunder booming like the judgment of heaven itself. She was soaked, shivering, her lips trembling, as she admitted she'd run away from a man who'd bought her hand like property, a man who wasn't used to hearing the word no, and had money enough and cruelty enough to chase her clear across state lines. Colt sat across from her, trying to steady the storm rising inside his own chest, because he knew the kind of men who hunted women. He'd been raised around them, had fought against some, and had buried enough nightmares to recognize another when he saw one. The way Evelyn flinched at every crack of thunder, the way she kept glancing at the windows as if expecting a face to appear, that told him everything he needed to know. She didn't need a husband. She needed a refuge. And despite being a man who'd sworn off the world, Colt wasn't the kind of rancher who'd turn away a soul in danger, not when the wide Wyoming winds carried the scent of violence on them. Hours passed as the storm raged, and Evelyn finally slept, deep, trembling, exhausted sleep, while Colt sat by the fire sharpening his hunting knife, his jaw set and his thoughts boiling. Who forged that letter? Who sent Evelyn here under his name? And more urgently, how long until the man she'd escaped from found her trail? Colt wasn't a hero. He didn't pretend to be. But as he watched the firelight cast soft gold across Evelyn's resting face, something primal in him stirred, something protective, something that felt like the beginning of a war. And as thunder rolled again across the Wyoming plains, Colt Maddox made a quiet vow to the storm itself. Whoever came looking for her would have to go through him first, even if it meant dragging out the parts of himself he'd buried long ago. The storm outside finally eased into a cold drizzle, the kind that soaked into the soil and promised trouble on the horizon. And Colt stood, looking at the sleeping stranger who fate had shoved onto his doorstep, knowing that from this moment on, nothing in his quiet life would ever be quiet. Again, and for the first time in years, he didn't mind the sound of that. And as the dawn crept pale and uncertain across the ranch the next morning, he sensed, deep down in the place where instinct lived, that this woman, this unexpected bride, carried a story big enough to tear open the sky, and that whatever came next, whatever danger hunted her, whatever fire sparked between them in the coming days, it would either save him or ruin him completely. And somehow, despite everything he'd ever feared about letting someone in again, the first night after the stranger bride arrived, the Wyoming sky turned wild, whipped by winds so fierce they rattled every shutter on Colt Maddox's ranch house. But inside, the air between Colt and Evelyn crackled even hotter, charged with something neither of them could outrun, not fear, not longing, not the unspoken truth that danger was coming for them both. Evelyn had spent the day helping him repair the barn roof. After a stray wind ripped half the shingles clean off, she worked with quiet determination, her small hands gripping the hammer with more resolve than strength. And Colt couldn't help watching her. Every nervous smile, every moment she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Every time she stood, her ground instead of shrinking like she had the night before, and he realized he'd never seen courage, wrapped in gentleness quite like hers. When dusk settled and the sky burned purple, they sat together in the warm glow of the fireplace, tension twisting between them like the tightening of a drawstring. Evelyn tried to speak about her past, her stolen engagement, her bruised escape, the man who'd promised to hunt her to the ends of the earth. But her voice kept faltering, and Colt's heart thudded with a protectiveness so fierce it nearly scared him. He'd lived so long behind walls of silence that he hardly recognized himself. Now, leaning closer to her, brushing a tear from her cheek with the rough pad of his thumb, murmuring reassurance in a low, gravel-soft voice he hadn't used in years. The storm outside escalated, wind howling across the prairie, and when the lightning flashed, Evelyn flinched, instinctively reaching for him, and that single moment, the way her fingers curled into his shirt, broke the last of Colt's resolve. He pulled her into his arms and she melted against him, trembling not from fear now, but from something deeper. Something that flickered between them like the firelight dancing on the wooden walls. Their breaths tangled, slow at first, then hungry with a need to be seen, to be held, to be understood in a world that had done nothing but take from them. Colt kissed her, not with the hesitation of a stranger, but with the fierce, burning certainty of a man reclaiming something he thought he'd lost forever. And Evelyn responded like she had been waiting her whole life for. Someone who wouldn't break her. The heat between them rose like the storm outside, wild and unstoppable. The kind of wildfire that scorched away old hurts and fears, leaving only raw truth behind. They didn't speak much, but their bodies did, sharing warmth, sharing breath, sharing the fragile, flickering hope that maybe this night was the beginning of something neither of them had dared imagine. And as the storm beat against the windows, as if demanding to be let in, Colt whispered promises he hadn't known were buried in him, vows to keep her safe no matter who came looking, no matter what hell they had to walk through. When dawn finally softened the storm's rage, Evelyn fell asleep curled against him, her fingers still gripping his shirt like an anchor in a world, determined to sweep her away. And Colt lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing with unshakable certainty that their first night had changed everything. He would fight for her now, not out of duty, not out of pity, but because something bigger than both of them had taken root in the storm-lit darkness. Something fierce and consuming and terrifyingly real. And as sunlight crept across the floorboards, Colt Maddox understood one thing clearly. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside them had only just begun, and he'd walk straight into it if it meant keeping her close. For the first time in years, he wanted a future, and all he could think was that he hoped she wanted it with him too.